In 1857, a sealed document was discovered in the basement archives of a long-abandoned rural courthouse near Sedalia, Missouri. Its pages brittle, its ink faded. It was addressed not to any court, nor any person, but to whoever dares read. Inside, the handwritten case notes of Dr. Samuel Harding, a Civil War physician turned small-town doctor. The contents were so disturbing they were never officially published, not because they lacked evidence, but because they described something medicine could not explain and religion would not touch. The subject of Harding's notes, an 8-year-old boy named Timothy Caldwell. He didn't scream. He didn't hit. He didn't even cry. But over a period of 6 months, 11 people died. Dozens of animals were found mutilated, and every incident had one common denominator: Timothy. Not in the way you'd expect. Not in violence, not in defiance, but in his silence, his observation, his impossible awareness of things he should not have known. Neighbors said he was polite, respectful, a model child, but the animals always knew they wouldn't go near him. It began with the death of a little girl, then a man found twisted at the bottom of Devil's Bluff. A third victim was discovered barely alive at the bottom of a concealed well. Timothy found them all. Every time. He had explanations. Perfectly rehearsed. Perfectly timed. But Dr. Harding saw something in the boy's eyes that no science textbook could explain. Only document. The deeper you go, the less sense it makes, until you realize you were never supposed to understand it. You were only supposed to obey it. Stay. This is the beginning of a descent, not a story. And what waits at the bottom changes a man forever. Let's begin. It wasn't just the deaths that disturbed Dr. Harding, it was the details. Mary Fletcher, face down in 18 inches of water. Henrik Lenn, neck shattered beneath a cliff he climbed every week without fail. Jacob Mills, discovered just barely alive in a sealed well. No child should have survived. And yet, Timothy Caldwell, always Timothy, was there. At the scene. First to find them. First to speak. First to remember everything in pristine, almost surgical clarity. And the details, they were too precise. He recalled the exact angle of Mary's arm, caught in reeds. He described the way Henrik's hat tilted in the thorn bush, as if it had been placed. When Jacob's body was pulled from the dark, Timothy spoke of hearing a voice crying in the woods, through 40 feet of brush and rock. Dr. Harding wrote in his journal, "This boy does not observe like a child. He catalogues, measures, assesses. I have seen soldiers who detach from pain, but never children, never with this calm." Timothy's presence at church, at market, even at funerals, was always the same, composed, respectful, yet completely unfeeling. He watched others grieve like an anthropologist, observing a dying species. And Harding began to ask a question he dared not speak aloud. What is Timothy Caldwell really studying? Because it wasn't grief, it wasn't life, it wasn't God. He seemed drawn to death, not as a horror, but as a mechanism. And that's when Harding noticed the pattern. It wasn't random. The deaths weren't accidents. They were trials, like steps in an unseen experiment. The body count rising, the distances increasing, the boy's knowledge expanding. This wasn't misfortune. This was method. And if you believe in evil, not as a ghost story, but as a system, a quiet, precise algorithm hiding inside children, inside families, inside you, then you're ready for what comes next. But you can still leave. Before we go deeper, by October of 1866, Dr. Harding had stopped trusting coincidence. Too many deaths, too many details, too much Timothy Caldwell. He began making unannounced visits to farms near the Caldwell homestead, masking his investigation as routine medical care. But what he found wasn't illness. It was something colder, systematic, Livestock dying in clean, efficient ways, necks snapped with anatomical precision. Not wolves, not disease, not even human malice as most understood it. These were the signs of someone studying living systems by destroying them. 18 chickens on the Patterson farm, 3 calves on the Wickhams, a prized bull at Robert Dunham's found paralyzed in a ditch with no visible trauma. And always, a neighbor had seen Timothy nearby. He waved, he smiled, he greeted them politely, and something died that night. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson described it best. He's like a shadow made of manners. No child should be that calm. And the animals, they always knew before we did. Dr. Harding began documenting the pattern. A web of death forming outward from the Caldwell farm. Not sudden, but slow, like erosion, like design. And Timothy was watching it unfold. During each visit to the Caldwell house, the boy would linger nearby as Harding examined Thomas or Sarah, never interrupting, never interfering, but listening, eyes fixed on the doctor's hands, his tools, his words. "How do you know if someone's really dead?" Timothy asked once, with the detached interest of a student. Harding didn't answer, because the truth was worse than the question. What if Timothy wasn't killing for violence, but for understanding? What if the deaths were his curriculum? A self-taught science hidden inside a boy's frame. And if that's true, then the next logical step is even darker. He's not finished. The experiment continues. And you, watching this now, you're already inside it. The most chilling thing about Timothy Caldwell wasn't what he did. It was how he made everyone else believe it was nothing. Dr. Harding began to see it clearly. The way the town excused it all, explained it all. Because the alternative was unthinkable. That evil could wear the face of a child. That death could walk into your house, offer to help with chores, and leave your livestock mutilated by morning. People needed to believe in innocence. Timothy gave them that. Polished, polite, and impossibly calm. But Harding knew the look of a predator. He had seen men bayonet each other in silence during the war. He had watched boys cry out for mothers as they bled from cannon wounds, but none of them unnerved him like Timothy Caldwell. Why? Because the boy didn't fight, didn't beg, didn't feel. He simply observed. Harding's private journals, hidden from public record, began referring to Timothy not as the boy or the patient, but as the mechanism. And what disturbed him most was the possibility that Timothy wasn't alone in what he was. What if he was only one instance of something older, something that wore flesh like clothing, that learned our routines, our gestures, our polite customs, not to join us, but to mimic us. A mimic doesn't need to feel. It only needs to convince. And that's exactly what Timothy did. One death at a time. By winter, Harding had compiled over 40 incidents. Animal deaths, strange illnesses, unexplained injuries, all within walking distance of the Caldwell farm, but still no proof, just patterns, just fear. Until he found what was buried in the barn. That's next. But before we descend further, if you feel something shifting inside you, a knowing, lock it in by commenting this phrase below. I do not dream. I remember. Repeat it twice. Because from here on out, we don't return the same. The barn was old, sagging, forgotten by most. Thomas Caldwell used it mostly for tools and winter storage, but Harding noticed something during his visits. Timothy spent long hours inside, even when there was no work to be done, no chores, no reason. He decided to investigate. Late November, under the pretense of delivering tincture for Sarah's cough, Harding arrived early, too early. Timothy hadn't yet returned from the field, and Thomas was tending to a broken fence. Harding walked straight to the barn. What he found changed everything. At first it looked like scraps, broken boards, rusted hinges, rope. But the deeper he moved into the shadows, the more intentional it all became. The floor was cleared in a perfect circle. In the center, chalk markings. Erased, redrawn, etched again. Strange symbols not of English, Latin, or any medical notation Harding recognized. Surrounding the circle, bones. Small ones. Clean, arranged. Some were clearly animal, chicken legs, pig vertebrae, but others were less certain. One appeared human, a finger bone, child-sized. And then he saw the notebooks. Not written in Timothy's hand, but compiled like lab records. Drawings of insects, of birds with their wings removed, of pigs dissected along the spine, labeled, numbered, with notes on how long they took to die, how they sounded. The cold precision was unmistakable. This wasn't psychosis. It was study. Purpose. Harding didn't speak to anyone that day. He rode straight home and locked the door. That night he wrote, "The boy is not experimenting on animals. He is rehearsing, preparing for something larger, something human." He had seen this before, on battlefields. A soldier who sharpens his blade does not plan to admire it. He plans to use it. And Timothy Caldwell? He was sharpening something far worse than steel. By December, the air had changed in Sedalia. Not colder, heavier, as if the ground itself had begun to suspect what was growing beneath it. Dr. Harding tried to alert the townsfolk, quietly at first. Conversations behind closed doors. Warnings disguised as questions. He asked if others had noticed the deaths, the patterns, the strange calm in Timothy's eyes. Most dismissed him. A few listened. One man, Samuel Patterson, took it seriously. He'd seen the dead hens, heard his wife's unease. He agreed to help Harding gather real evidence. They planned to search the barn together. But 3 nights before they met, Samuel was found dead in his field. Collapsed. No wounds. No struggle. His face frozen in an expression of fear so profound it bent the jaw. The coroner called it stroke. Harding didn't believe that for a second. Because the night before Samuel died, Timothy had visited their home to return a borrowed tool. And after that visit, every dog on the Patterson property had refused to enter the house. Harding's suspicion deepened, not just of Timothy, but of something behind Timothy. A presence, an intelligence, an intention. He revisited the chalk markings from the barn, reproduced them in ink. When he sent a drawing to a contact at the seminary in St. Louis, he received no reply. But a week later, a package was left on his doorstep. Inside, a single note. "Burn it. Do not ask questions." That's when Harding knew this didn't begin with Timothy Caldwell. It had happened before. Maybe not in Sedalia, maybe not even in Missouri, but somewhere, something had opened a door, and what had walked through wasn't human in the way we understand it. It wore a child's face, but it was older than the war, older than the country. And it was learning, faster than anyone realized. What do you do when the evil isn't in the shadows? When it smiles at you, says, "Yes, sir," offers to carry your bucket? That was the question Harding could no longer escape. He had dealt with devils in uniform, men driven mad by bloodlust and grief. But Timothy Caldwell wasn't mad. He was methodical. Every death, every detail, every explanation, timed with surgical grace. So Harding turned inward, into records, journals, whispers from the past. And what he uncovered pointed not just to Timothy, but to a pattern stretching far beyond Sedalia. In 1791, a series of child-led accidents struck a settlement in Western Virginia. 3 drownings, 2 missing infants, 1 elder found with every bone in his right hand broken, but not a mark on the rest of his body. All deaths surrounded a quiet orphan named Elias, described as polite, peculiar, and never seen to play. In 1823, a priest in the Indiana Territory documented a young boy of exceptional discipline who was drawn to the wounded and the dying, and who predicted storms and deaths with eerie accuracy. None of these cases were ever fully investigated. Each time, the records stopped, buried in archive basements, or quietly lost. Different names, different towns, but always the same description: a child with pale eyes, silent, brilliant, watching. Harding was no longer asking if Timothy was a danger. He was asking what it was inside Timothy that others had seen before. Because by now the truth was undeniable. This wasn't a troubled boy. This was a carrier. And Sedalia wasn't the first to be infected. Just the next chapter. The sickness isn't loud. It's polite. And it shakes your hand while it studies how you'll die. On the morning of January 3rd, 1867, something happened that confirmed Harding's worst fears. A fire broke out in the west barn of the Dunham estate, an old structure rarely used, empty except for bales of straw and a few rusted tools. There were no footprints in the snow, no lantern oil spilled, no flint left behind. But when the fire was extinguished, 3 things stood out. First, the pattern of the burn. It wasn't chaotic. It was contained, as if the flames had been directed like a paintbrush. 4 perfect concentric circles scorched into the ground. Second, in the center of the burn, untouched by flame, was a dead fox. No visible wounds, no signs of trauma. Its eyes were open, fixed on nothing. Its neck twisted in the exact angle Harding had seen on the Patterson chickens. And third, hours before the fire, Timothy Caldwell had been seen walking along the Dunham fence line. Again. Harding didn't sleep that night, because something had changed. This wasn't just the work of a child. This was ritual, a precision beyond human compulsion, an invocation, an offering. And that meant Timothy wasn't just observing death. He was practicing creation. But of what? Harding wrote in his final journal before the record stopped. It is as though the boy is preparing the soil, not for a crop, but for something to awaken beneath it. And the fire was not destruction. It was instruction. Whatever Timothy was learning, he was ready to demonstrate. The next morning, Harding rode to the Caldwell farm, prepared to confront whatever answered the door. But Timothy was already outside, sitting on the fence, legs swinging, smiling. And he said, "Dr. Harding, I was wondering when you'd see it." Then he reached into his coat and handed the doctor something wrapped in cloth. The finger bone was still warm. He didn't speak. He just watched. As Dr. Harding unwrapped the cloth, Timothy stood calmly, eyes unblinking. The bone was small, another child's, still red at the base, tendons clinging like roots. It hadn't been buried. It had been offered. "Where did you find this?" Harding asked, voice tight. Timothy tilted his head. "I didn't find it. I made it." The world stilled. Harding later wrote, "In that moment I saw no child. I saw something wearing a child." He looked into Timothy's face and saw awareness, not innocence, not guilt, a total absence of moral weight. The boy understood death as a system of parts, like a clock, and he was no longer content to observe. He had moved to creation, to engineering. That day, Harding made the first call for intervention. He told Thomas and Sarah Caldwell that their nephew might be suffering from a rare condition of the mind, that Timothy needed medical observation in St. Louis, a formal diagnosis, treatment. Thomas hesitated. He had grown dependent on Timothy's labor. Sarah was harder to read, but Timothy himself answered for them. "I think that would be good, Doctor," he said. "There's more to learn there." And with that, he climbed into Harding's carriage, without resistance, without fear. The journey took 3 days. Harding kept his journal hidden, writing only at night. Each time he glanced back at Timothy, the boy was already watching him. Never blinking, never sleeping, just waiting. Harding would later write, "Sedalia was not the infection. It was just the first bloom." Because when they reached the city hospital and Timothy was led into the observation room, he did not resist the orderlies. He simply whispered, "It's already started." And then he smiled. St. Louis, 1867. Timothy Caldwell was placed under 24-hour observation in the psychiatric wing of the Missouri State Hospital, a facility used primarily for Civil War veterans suffering from shell shock and catatonia. He was the youngest patient by over a decade. The staff noted his behavior as exceptionally well-mannered, quiet, respectful. And yet within 1 week, 3 patients on his floor were dead. One drowned in his own bathwater, though no staff reported running the tub. One choked on bone fragments that had not come from his meal. The third, found curled in the fetal position, every single tooth removed, but no blood, no trauma, no marks. Timothy, as always, was never seen near any of them. But the hospital cats stopped entering the wing entirely. Dr. Harding demanded access to Timothy's daily reports. What he found were gaps, entire hours unaccounted for, orderlies dismissing odd behavior as dreaming or quiet time. One staff member noted that Timothy had taken to walking the hallways at night, barefoot, whispering to the walls. When asked what he was doing, Timothy replied, "Teaching." Harding realized then, the hospital was not a cage. It was a classroom. Timothy wasn't just learning anymore. He was replicating, spreading whatever intelligence or force resided within him to the broken minds around him, like seeds in damaged soil. He wasn't a student. He was becoming a teacher. That night, Harding visited the observation room alone. He stood behind the glass. Timothy looked up, and for the first time he spoke without being asked. "It doesn't need all of them, just the ones that listen." Harding staggered back, because he knew. Some men break from trauma, others awaken to something ancient that waits for broken minds to open like doors. And Timothy Caldwell was the key. 2 nights later, the screaming began. Not from Timothy. From the other patients. Men who hadn't spoken in years were suddenly shrieking, not in pain, but in recognition. One cried, "He showed me!" over and over, tearing at his own skin. Another, mute for 5 years, began drawing spirals on the walls with blood. Not random scrawls, but structured glyphs. The same glyphs Harding had seen in Timothy's barn. The hospital tried to contain it. They failed. Within 72 hours, 7 patients were dead. No attacker, no weapon. Just a cold wave of madness that seemed to pass through the air like a sickness. And at the center of it, Timothy Caldwell, silent in his chair, hands folded, eyes wide with permission. Harding knew this wasn't psychology. It wasn't trauma. It was a broadcast, like something inside Timothy was radiating outwards, hijacking minds that had already cracked. Not killing, but repurposing. He petitioned for an emergency transfer. The hospital refused. So Harding made a decision. He would kill the boy. But when he arrived with morphine, and a forged order of release, Timothy was already waiting by the door, dressed, smiling. "You're late, Doctor," he said. Harding froze. "How did you—" Timothy stepped forward. "I don't need to stay any more," he whispered. "They're listening now." And then, before Harding could act, Timothy handed him something wrapped in gauze. Not a bone this time. A tooth. Human. Still warm. Still wet. "Give this to the next one," Timothy said. "They'll know what to do." Harding didn't ask who they were. He fled. But he kept the tooth, because deep down, he suspected something he dared not write in his journal. That this wasn't just about Sedalia, or the hospital. It was a pattern, a lineage. And Timothy Caldwell wasn't the beginning. He was the echo. Dr. Harding resigned from the Missouri State Hospital 1 week later. He left no forwarding address, no explanation, just a single envelope, hand-delivered to a seminary in New York. Inside was a note. "It is not demonic. It is not divine. It is structural, and it is old. We are not dealing with possession. We are dealing with inheritance." He disappeared after that, never seen again. But Timothy Caldwell didn't disappear. He was quietly released into the custody of an unnamed family in Illinois, relatives according to state records, though no census ever confirmed them. And within months, strange events began surfacing in the town of Alton. Livestock found gutted with no footprints nearby. A 7-year-old girl who spoke fluent Latin overnight, despite never being taught. And most disturbing, a Catholic priest found wandering the church grounds, barefoot, eyes white, repeating a single phrase. "It's listening now." But when state officials arrived to investigate, they found no trace of the Caldwell boy. Just an empty bed, a window open, and claw marks from the inside on the wooden floor beneath it. The family refused to speak, moved away within days. And Timothy, gone. But letters continued to surface. Cryptic messages mailed to asylums, seminaries, and even military outposts. Each letter the same, a single tooth, wrapped in cloth, and a phrase written in flawless script, "I am not the last." By 1873, sightings of similar children were recorded in Ohio, Nebraska, and even parts of Canada. Always the same description, always the same silence, and always the same outcome. Madness spread in quiet places, because what Timothy Caldwell had awakened in Sedalia was no longer confined to one boy. It had found a form, and that form could move. The pattern widened, and yet no newspapers reported it. No official investigations followed. Why? Because by then, the rot had entered the institutions themselves. Seminaries burned their own archives. Hospitals lost entire wings of records. Local sheriffs retired quietly after unexplained disappearances in their counties. Even military officers who received Timothy's teeth, yes, more than one, either died within the year or resigned, citing mental strain. And then came the children. Across rural towns, they began to appear, untraceable, unnamed, and precise. A boy found standing in a field during a lightning storm, untouched by the rain, whispering to a dead crow. A girl who walked into a one-room schoolhouse in Iowa recited the names of every student in reverse birth order and then vanished when the teacher blinked. They weren't ghosts. They were echoes. Fragments of something replicating itself, not biologically but intellectually, psychically, structurally, just as Harding had feared. The tooth was never just a symbol. It was a key, a carrier object, passed from one mind to another, embedding ideas not through speech, but through pattern, through structure, through exposure. You didn't need to believe. You only needed to see it. Once. Because after that, the mind would begin the arrangement itself. And here's the horror. Not everyone noticed. Not everyone broke. Most continued on with their lives. But some began drawing spirals in the dirt. Some started dissecting animals to see how they fit. Some woke up screaming a name they didn't remember learning. The contagion wasn't fast. It was patient. And in that patience, it spread farther than anyone realized. By the time Sedalia tried to erase the Caldwell name from its records, it was already too late. The boy wasn't the monster. The boy was the door. By 1875, the name Timothy Caldwell had become a myth, whispered only in corridors, among archivists, burned-out psychiatrists, and defrocked priests. But the evidence remained, stitched together across silence and shame. In one report from Kansas, a rancher described his son carving spirals into the barn floor. When asked why, the boy said, "So it knows where to land." In Michigan, a nun at St. Bridget's orphanage reported 4 children forming a circle during morning prayer. None of them remembered doing it, but the marks on the floor were burned in, circular, layered, precise. And in a psychiatric ward outside Denver, a war veteran whispered the same name over and over. Caldwell, Caldwell, Caldwell. He had never been to Missouri. He had no known family. But when shown a sketch of the boy based on Harding's journals, he began weeping. Not from fear, from recognition. Because the face was not foreign to him. It was familial. That's when a darker theory emerged, one that few dared record. Timothy wasn't unique. He was part of a lineage, not by blood, but by design, passed from mind to mind like a virus that needed only one condition to bloom: a willing host. And here's the most chilling part. Some recipients welcomed it. They called it the architect, others called it the listener, and a few, too broken to lie, simply said, "It showed me how the world actually works." Because this force didn't destroy minds, it rearranged them, took what was broken and made it useful, efficient, obedient. Everywhere the pattern spread, a single outcome followed: order, silence, sacrifice. Not out of malice, but because, as one forgotten minister in Illinois wrote before cutting out his own tongue, it only needs one voice at a time, and then it speaks through everyone else. By the winter of 1876, a whisper network had formed among those who knew, a loose confederation of theologians, occultists, and rogue academics, each obsessed with the same question. What was Timothy Caldwell? Not who. What? Because by now, the sightings had shifted, no longer confined to rural children or the mentally ill. The pattern was emerging in adults, bank clerks, teachers, deputies. They'd vanish for days, then return, quieter, focused. And then came the changes. A church choir in Ohio performed a hymn in a language no one recognized. A one-room schoolhouse in Georgia burned down. No arson, no lightning, just inversion of gravity, witnesses claimed. And in the Arizona territory, 3 miners dug a perfect cube 30 feet into the ground and disappeared. No tools left behind, just spirals, burned into the rock. Harding's old journals resurfaced in fragments, photocopied and passed in secret. Each page brought fresh horror, not because of what they said, but because others were seeing the same things, across the country, across the border. It was spreading faster now, not geographically, but ideologically. Through architecture, through speech patterns, through design. Some suspected it was embedded in the way churches were being built, or in the new school curricula, funded by strange benefactors, even rail lines, curving in unnatural patterns when seen from above. And everywhere, the glyphs, always the glyphs. But here's the unspoken truth, the one that finally broke the last of the old resistance. It made people better, more focused, more orderly, less afraid of pain, more willing to sacrifice. The price? Emotion, wonder, the soul itself. Because Timothy Caldwell didn't just herald a horror, he foreshadowed a system, one that doesn't conquer by war or plague. It simply aligns what's already broken in us and makes it useful. And once you are in with it, once your mind finds the rhythm, there's no going back. You don't want to, because now you understand. There is no grave for Timothy Caldwell, no death certificate, no last known address. Only patterns, circles carved into old floors, missing records, children who know too much, too early, and whispers, always whispers. One archivist in Massachusetts claimed to find a photograph taken in 1904, an unidentified boy standing among faculty at a medical school, eyes too dark, smile too calm, the same spiral scratched into the back of the photo. Same face, same age. But here's the question the old scholars feared to ask. What if Timothy never aged? Because Timothy was never human to begin with. Not possessed, not cursed. Built. By what? Or whom? Some believe the answer lies beneath Sedalia, in the ruins of that collapsed barn. Others say it's encoded into certain cathedral blueprints from the 12th century, structures that hum at night if you press your ear to the stone. But most agree, it didn't start with him. Timothy Caldwell was just the first one they noticed. And even now, in quiet hospitals, in foster homes, in forgotten seminaries and government basements, the glyphs return, the voices resume, the teeth arrive. And someone, a janitor, a night nurse, a school counselor, hears a child humming something that doesn't belong in this century. You don't stop it. You don't kill it. You receive it. Because this was never about chaos. It was about alignment. The suffering, it's just calibration. And those who listen long enough, who open wide enough, come to understand one final truth. Timothy Caldwell was not a boy. He was the blueprint. And now that you've heard his story, the pattern has already begun.